Hello superheroes, in this video I'm going to show you how to identify negative energy pendulums. I'm also going to share with you 4 ways to avoid getting trapped by pendulums and beat them in their own game. Welcome back to another video. I'm Scarlet Grace from UnseenSeraph.com. I'm a manifestation coach and I help people to create a life more amazing than their wildest dreams. Today's video is all about pendulums. The idea of pendulums comes from a book called Reality Transurfing by Vadim Zeland. I have a separate video explaining what pendulums are in detail, so if you haven't watched it, I'll link that down below. But to give you a summary, pendulums are energy structures created when multiple people have similar thoughts. Since their thoughts vibrate on the same level, the collective energy of all these thoughts create this energy structure called a pendulum. A pendulum has one goal only, and that is to continue growing. Since pendulums are created by the energy of people's thoughts, the more people that have thoughts of the same vibration as a specific pendulum, the more the pendulum grows. Therefore, pendulums aim to draw you into their sphere of influence, so that you start thinking thoughts that are of the same vibration too, and in this way feed the pendulum. The problem with pendulums is that they are destructive, because their only goal is to grow. Pendulums don't care about the well-being of the people they feed from. They only care about using your energy to feed. When you're under the influence of a pendulum, your energy goes towards feeding the pendulum instead of going towards accomplishing your own goals. In addition to that, pendulums will impose their own thoughts and beliefs on you, and you'll start thinking that these are your own thoughts and your beliefs, when in reality they are the pendulums. In that manner, pendulums are basically social conditioning. The reason why it's so important to become aware of pendulums and know how to avoid them is that your most powerful weapon in life is choice. The problem with choice is that most people never properly learn how to exercise it. They get trapped by pendulums and they think they are making decisions and choices of their own free will, but in reality it's the pendulum imposing those ideas onto them. When you learn how to spot and beat pendulums, you gain back your ability to freely choose. So learning how to choose to turn down pendulums is what will open the way for you to start choosing the things you actually desire to have in your life. So let's get into how to actually beat pendulums. Way number 1. The number 1 way to beat the pendulum is by ignoring it. Yep, you heard that right. You can't beat the pendulum by opposing it, because pendulums feed from 2 categories of people. The people that are in agreement with the pendulum and the people who strongly oppose it. Why? Because both of these groups of people are focusing their thoughts and energy on the pendulum. Pendulums don't care if you are with them or against them. What they're always trying to do is provoke an emotional reaction, because that's how they feed. Whether that reaction is positive or negative is irrelevant as long as it is a strong reaction. That's why pendulums often come in opposing couples, sports teams, political parties, rival brands. If you're wondering how something like rival brands can be a pendulum, think about it for a bit. For example, we have iPhone versus Android. Have you noticed how almost everyone seems to be either an iPhone person or an Android person? And the key word here is person. iPhone versus Android isn't something people usually think they have. It's something they think they are. You don't just have an iPhone, you're an iPhone person. You make it part of your identity. That's how pendulums impose their thought vibration. If you just see yourself as someone who happens to have an iPhone or Android phone, then it's not that big of a deal. So you aren't going to have strong emotional reactions to feed the pendulum. If, on the other hand, you see that iPhone or Android as part of your identity, if you identify as an iPhone person, then if anyone challenges that identity and its worth, by saying, for example, that Android is better than iPhone, you're going to immediately have an emotional reaction. And this is going to lead into an argument, and the pendulums will feed from that. So the number 1 way to beat the pendulum is to acknowledge it exists, and then calmly decide that you aren't going to react to it. It's deceptively simple, but it takes a bit of practice until it becomes a habit. You need to watch yourself and your thoughts, and every time you catch yourself having an immediate strong reaction to something that someone says or something you see on the news, you stop yourself and examine what triggered that reaction. Then you remind yourself that this is just the pendulum that is trying to provoke you to react so that it can feed. At this point, you make a conscious effort to not get involved. This may mean walking away from a conversation or turning off the TV. The second way to beat the pendulum is by reacting in a very unexpected way. Pendulums feed by getting people to follow a script. For example, someone says something and this gets you angry, and then you react in an angry manner and you start fighting. Or you hear something on the news and it scares you, and then you spend the next half hour worrying about whatever it was that triggered you. One way to beat a pendulum is to do something very unexpected. It doesn't really matter what it is, as long as it breaks you out of the script. For example, say you were watching the news and you heard that unemployment numbers are rising. Your job isn't very secure, so the script would have you worried over losing your job. When you catch yourself reacting to the news by worrying, you can stop and do something completely out of context instead, like smile and clap your hands and sing "Mary Had a Little Lamb," for example. This would be so random and so out of context that it would completely derail the script and make it impossible for the pendulum to hook onto you. If you're familiar with NLP, this is called a pattern interrupt. You have a pattern or script and you use something completely out of context, in this case Mary had a little lamb, to interrupt it. So you go from the original pattern, which was watching something bad on the news, get triggered, spend 30 minutes worrying about it and feeding the pendulum, to a new pattern, which is watching something bad on the news, immediately get triggered, realizing you got triggered and singing "Mary Had a Little Lamb," laughing at how ridiculous this is and moving on with your day without the pendulum hooking on you. The popular advice to people who are stressed when they have to give a speech to picture the audience in their underwear is a prime example of this method. The third way to beat a pendulum is by going along with it while remaining dispassionate about it. Say, for example, that your boss comes to you and starts barking orders and saying things aren't going as they should. If you're aware of pendulums, you can recognize this as part of a pendulum. Your boss is being like that because he's under a lot of pressure. Maybe his boss gave him the same treatment earlier, pressuring him and passing his anxiety to him, and that's why he's acting like that towards you now. Now, if you're unaware of pendulums, then you'd most likely react in a defensive manner, or you'd just play along but secretly feel resentful towards him. If you immediately realize that this is a pendulum, though, you can remain dispassionate, while on the outside you can play along with it. Instead of reacting defensively, agree with him. Maybe tell him that he's right to be stressed over this. There's a lot of work to be done, and it all falls on your department. Of course, you'll do your best to have everything ready in time. This will get him to relax and put his guard down, because it probably won't be the reaction he expected from you. At this point, the pendulum doesn't have that much power over you anymore. At the same time, though, the pendulum doesn't see you as a threat either, because you're not directly challenging it, since on the outside, it sounds like you agree with your boss. Once he's let his guard down, you can diplomatically lead things where you want them to go. If you just protested that he can't be serious about piling all that work on you, you would have accomplished nothing. But in this way, the chances that you'll be able to get to a more sensible way of handling things is much greater. The energy will move towards a more favorable solution, like your boss deciding that this is too much work for one employee only, or realizing that this isn't in your job description and taking the pile of extra work to someone else whose job it actually is to deal with it. In either case, this pendulum wasn't able to hook you. The fourth way to defeat a pendulum is very interesting. See, pendulums don't just swing randomly. Something upsets the balance, making the pendulum swing. If you find a way to restore balance, even if the way seems not directly related to the situation, then the pendulum will pass you by. In this method, you try to figure out what the person representing the pendulum really needs, what they are currently lacking, and you visualize them getting it. Let's return to the example of the angry boss we used in the third method. The boss is angry because he's under a lot of pressure. What would your boss rather do that would get him to relax? When he approaches you angrily, you do your best to disassociate from the problem. You basically ignore it and focus on visualizing him enjoying an activity that relaxes him and makes him happy. For example, you may know that he loves golfing, So you picture him happy and relaxed, golfing with his friends. If you don't know what specifically he prefers, then you could visualize something more general, like him relaxing on the couch at home instead. If you're successful, then the vibration of your positive thoughts in which the person is getting what they truly need will restore the balance on an energetic level, and the pendulum will leave you alone. If you like this last method and are eager to try it, then make sure not to miss next week's video, because I'm going to teach you a simple method you can use to rewrite and change a negative event as it's happening. So if you haven't already, then click the subscribe button and the bell icon, and as always, feel free to ask questions and share your thoughts in the comments.